Happy Sabbath. How are you all? I hope you enjoy this week, even though it has been raining. The rain is needed, right? In order for things to grow. And I hope you stay dry and you stay warm inside your house and enjoy indoor activities. Tonight, I continue to ask the Lord to bless each one of you with His love, with joy in your heart, with peace coming from the above, and also healing for those of you who are not well. And tonight, the chapter that we're going to study is in Genesis chapter 11. Let's start reading Genesis chapter 11, verse 1. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. One language, if the original language is literally one lip. Meaning, like the verse said, the world only had one language or dialect at that time. Because they all came from one single family, from Noah. And they were congregating in one place. They all communicated in one language until the famous event that is going to be in this story. I'm always curious, what is the original language? The one that Noah spoke. Probably even Adam and Eve spoke. Well, according to St. Augustine, who was born in AD 354, well known for his influential Christian idea, he was known as the Christian thinker. This is what he said. He said, "For it is written that there was at first one language to all people, and that language is called Hebrew." I don't know how true it is, but this is what he said. According to verse 2, let me read. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. So the first scene opens with a movement. People were moving eastward to the plain in Shinar. Shinar is Babylonia. Let me show you the map. So actually looked more like they were traveling southeast of the starting point. And the starting point was at the mountain range of Ararat. This is where the ark parked, right? Ended there, landed there. And this is the beginning of the event in chapter 11 of Genesis. The scholars think that there is a significant meaning about their traveling eastward, the east, because the Bible often associates God with the east. Let us look at the following examples. After sinning, Adam and Eve worshiped God at the east gate of the Garden of Eden. And the tabernacle and temple in Israel, both facing east. And the wise man, remember when Jesus was born? The wise man follow a star in the east. And in addition, God often sends east wind to fulfill his intention, like an east wind blows the locusts into Egypt, an east wind blows open the Red Sea, and God sends a hot east wind to overheat Jonah. Remember the story? And Jesus is called the morning star. Morning star in astronomical terms is referring to Venus, which appears in the east after each morning. Even the second coming is described as being like the lightning streaking from east to west. So these people were traveling east. Where is Shinar? The land of Shinar is the region of ancient Babylon in Mesopotamia, part of our modern Iraq. Let's read on verse 3 to 4. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heaven, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. The use of bricks for building a large structure was common in this early period of time. Use of huge quarry stones, weigh many tons, came later on. Remember in Genesis chapter 9, God gave Noah the promise to never send big flood to destroy the world, and also instructed him to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Remember that, right? Therefore, they were not supposed to congregate at Ararat. So they were supposed to disperse. While dispersing, a portion of the post-flood group under the leadership of this powerful Nimrod, which we mentioned in the last chapter, decided to stop at Shinar and establish a city. And according to some scholars, the ancient pagans built cities with this thing called ziggurat, which is like a tower. And they built ziggurats in the midst of their city for their gods to live. And I'll talk about it in a minute. So what does that have to do with the narrative, the story here? Well, this rebellious group of people disobeyed God's command to populate the earth. So they congregate in Shinar to build a city for themselves. So they traveled eastward. You know, eastward is where God is, I just mentioned, right? So they seek to build a city where God lives. That's good, right? Isn't it? Well, their action seems right, but not their intention. Their actual intention was to elevate themselves to where God is. You read from the verse, right? Their intention is to make a name of themselves. Undoubtedly, these men fear an other universal flood in spite of God's promise. And they intend to build a tower that would reach the heavens where God lives and stay above any flood he might send. But most of all, they want to make a name for themselves, as I mentioned. And as the verse said, we can see here that the human pride leading these people to defy God. They were refusing to move on, scattering to fill the earth as they had been instructed. And this was Nimrod's and the people's effort to disobey the command of God and thus defeat the council of heaven. So now let's talk a little bit more about the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel has received a lot of attention. Scholars think that it is probably what the ancient Babylonian called a ziggurat, as I have just mentioned, meaning the gateway of the gods. These towers, they say, are to allow the gods who live on top to travel back and forth between heaven and earth. And archaeologists think the ziggurats were developed in the 3rd millennium BC at Uruk and which is in Babylonian, as well as Nineveh. And these ziggurats is sort of like buildings with multiple stories, but squarish, okay? And the bottom story is the widest, and it gets smaller and smaller on the top, like a pyramid. So I'm going to show you in the picture. Perhaps it's like the ziggurat of Marduk temple in Babylon. And a Babylonian text described this ziggurat has a base of 295 square feet with 7 platforms over 108 feet high. I would think the Tower of Babel is much higher. And the top platform has a temple where the God meet with humanity. So access to the top was achieved by ramps or stairways. So over here, the intention of this group of people is to reach heaven. So the tower is probably much higher. So high in the heaven that the flood, when it comes, would not drown them. Well, did God see what they were doing? Let's read on. This is from verses 5 to 7. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse the language, that they may not understand one another's speech. These people were so united, not for good purpose. They defied God. And it shows that if allowed, they could establish their own cities and kingdoms and do whatever they desire to do without restraint. So the Lord came down to see. So it's a figurative way of speaking that God is all-knowing, He's omniscient, and nothing could escape His eyes. So God said nothing that they propose. That means that the potential is that humankind will become as willful, sinful as they were before the flood. God will not allow this to happen. So God confused the language, make it impossible for them to continue this project. And so the Lord scattered them. This is verses 8 to 9. Scatter them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. God addressed their prideful rebellion at the first act. They had chosen to settle. He forced them to scatter. This story or this narrative tells us how it was that the families of the earth were separated, everyone according to his language, as mentioned in chapter 10, verse 5, and were divided on the earth after the flood, as mentioned in chapter 10, verse 32. Well, the name of the tower is called Babel, and this is linked to a Hebrew word meaning to confuse. From this story, the Israelite understood not only how so many nations, people, and languages came about, but also the rebellious origin of their enemy, Babylon. So why God scattered them? Because they would not fill the earth as God had commanded them. God confused their language so that they had to separate and collect in regions where their own language was spoken. So to summarize this story, let me read this paragraph from this one commentary. It said, God, who made man as the one creature with whom he could speak, was to take the gift of language and use it to divide the race. For the apostate worship at Babel indicated that man had turned against God in pride. Now let me read verses 10 to 29. I'm going to read it really fast because it is a genealogy. It's mostly about begets who begets who. Okay, let me read. This is the genealogy of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begot Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. After he begot Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years and begot sons and daughters. Arphaxad lived 35 years and begot Salah. After he begot Salah, Arphaxad lived 403 years and begot sons and daughters. Salah lived 30 years and begot Eber. After he begot Eber, Salah lived 403 years and begot sons and daughters. Eber lived 34 years and begot Pelah. After he begot Pelah, Eber lived 430 years and begot sons and daughters. Pelah lived 30 years and begot Ru. After he begot Ru, Pelah lived 209 years and begot sons and daughters. Ru lived 32 years and begot Serug. And after he begot Serug, Ru lived 207 years and begot sons and daughters. Serug lived 30 years and begot Nahor. And after he begot Nahor, Serug lived 200 years and begot sons and daughters. Nahor lived 29 years and begot Terah. And after he begot Terah, Nahor lived 119 years and begot sons and daughters. And now Terah lived 70 years and begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. This list of 10 descendants of Shem, like that of Adam in chapter 5, only stated the line of the faithful from Adam to Noah. You remember that? And didn't mention the elder lineage. And it is just like in chapter 5, the list of these 10 patriarchs from Adam to Noah would provide the link between the offspring promised to the women that leads to the Messiah. So it did not mention all the other lineage, only mentioned those faithful ones and the lineage that would lead to the Messiah. So out of the survivors of the flood, Noah and his sons, the passage only mentioned the line of the promise. It passes the line of Cain, the line of the builder of the city, and the civilization that was destroyed in the flood. So verses 10 to 26 show that God's promise concerning the seed of the women will continue to thrive, and nothing can stand at Babylon. And though the seed of Noah was scattered at Babylon, God preserved a line of 10 great men from Noah to Abraham. So let's read on. And this is from same chapter, starting from 27 to 32. This is a genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot, and Haran died before his father Terah in his native land, in Ur of the Chaldeans. And then Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren. She had no child. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldean to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So let's clarify the relationships here. From this passage, that Abram's father is Terah. And Terah has 3 sons and 1 daughter, Abram, Nahor, Haran, and Sarai. Sarai is Abram's half-sister according to another chapter, which is Genesis 20, verse 11. Let me read to you. And Abram said, Abram was actually explaining Abimelech, the king of Gerar, about his wife. So Abram said, because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed she, Sarai, is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And also this passage means that Abram has two brothers, Nahor, Haran, and one sister, Sarai. And this passage also mentioned that Haran has one son and two daughters. The son is Lot, and two daughters, Milcah and Iscah. And Haran died early, even before his father. And Abram married his half-sister Sarai. And Nahor, which is Abram's brother, married his brother Haran's daughter, Milcah. I mentioned that this text does not mention Sarai's father. We know she is Abram's half-sister because of Genesis 20, verse 11. Terah. At long last, we come to the family of Terah and the birth of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And years later, Abram would be renamed Abraham, and that would be mentioned in chapter 17, and would become the father of Isaac, and that is in chapter 21. And he was the progenitor of the Hebrew people from which the promised deliverer, the promised Messiah, Jesus, would come. So what does this chapter tell us about God? It is interesting to note that Yahweh is used in this story. The name Yahweh referring to a tender, personal God. And this is very appropriate considering how he dealt with this group of people in Shinar. The verse said, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built, in verse 5. So instead of destroying them, he shows the builders of Babel mercy. He does away with the universal language by confusing their communication. He effectively stopped the construction of the tower that becomes known as Babel or confusion. He spared their lives, but he's ended the rebellion and scattered them over the face of the earth. Ultimately, he accomplished his purpose. So what does this chapter tell us about humanity? Men often think that they can outsmart God. And here it shows us that the age-old sin of self-exaltation, of pridefulness, can only end in failure. So what does this chapter tell us about how we should live? We should live according to the instruction of God. God knows everything from the beginning to the end. And he knows what's the best. He has our well-being in his mind. So we should listen to his command. And where is his command? All his commands are written in the Bible. Happy Sabbath. Have a nice week.